Well, hello there. I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Tuesday, June 21st. And tonight, we're talking about elections past and present. It's primary night in a number of states, including Alabama and Georgia. Some candidates have been echoing former President Trump's hopes about the 2020 election. But how many of them will win their party's nominations? Steve Kornacki starts us off tonight at the big board. Then...
And he had a pistol. When I saw the gun, I knew I had to get close.
Republican state officials testified today about the intimidation they faced from Trump supporters pushing to overturn the election. We'll have highlights of today's January 6th hearing. It seems the school shooter in Uvalde, Texas, might have been stopped within minutes. The latest details about the police response raise a lot of concerns. The editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune joins us ahead. Plus, a breakthrough on new gun legislation in the Senate. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he supports the plan. We'll show you what's in it. And we'll have the latest from Ukraine, including what U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland is doing there. It is Election Day. It's Tuesday after all, and the polls have just closed. Voters in Alabama and Georgia headed back to the polls, and Virginia held its regularly scheduled primary. Now, some of the races we're watching tonight have even more importance because of January 6th. We'll get to that in a moment, but first, the big races. We're watching Georgia's 2nd district, that's in its southeastern corner, as well as the 6th and 10th districts, those are near Atlanta. In Virginia, we're looking at the 2nd district in Norfolk and the 7th district, that's kind of between Charlottesville and Richmond. And in Alabama, there's a hot primary for the Republican Senate nomination. Let's begin at the big board with NBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki, who just ran into the room. Steve, what do you know?
Well, it's 8 p.m. That means poll closing time in the big statewide runoff we're looking at tonight. We don't have any votes in yet, but this is the matchup here. It is Katie Britt versus Mo Brooks. This is for the Republican Senate nomination in Alabama. And obviously, if you win the Senate Republican nomination in Alabama, given the state's political tilt, you're probably going to, you're in very good shape to win in the fall. The dynamic, the backdrop for this race, Donald Trump. Mo Brooks initially had the Donald Trump endorsement. Then he lost the Donald Trump endorsement. Then he still made this runoff. Neither of these candidates got 50% in the preliminary election. And then Brooks, when he made the runoff, made a very public appeal to the former president to re-endorse him. And Donald Trump responded to that appeal by endorsing Katie Britt. So Britt comes into tonight. She outpaced Brooks by about 15 points in the first round of voting. She has now picked up Donald Trump's endorsement. Again, the polls now closing in Alabama at this hour. We will see what the results look like. But Brooks certainly facing an uphill battle. He really did try to bank his campaign on Donald Trump. He lost the former president's support, and he could never get it back.
Georgia obviously has been a big focus today because of the January 6th hearings. Tell us what we see there so far.
Yeah, we got Georgia on our minds right now. Take a look here. Here's a Republican primary in the southwest corner of the state. This is interesting. This is a district that's occupied by a Democrat, Sanford Bishop, who has held this seat for 3 decades at this point. Redistricting has made it a little bit more competitive. We can show you under these lines, Biden still won the district fairly comfortably. But if this is the kind of wave year Republicans think it may be, that's the kind of margin that starts to make a Democratic incumbent uncomfortable. So this could be a potentially a competitive race here. You've got Jeremy Hunt here, who is trailing. He's been touted by national Republicans. National Republicans had a lot of hopes that Jeremy Hunt in particular could be a strong candidate in this district. He didn't live in the district before this race, though. And in the early returns, at least, he is losing to Chris West. So this would be, for national Republicans, they thought their best chance here would be Hunt getting the nomination. Hunt trailing in the early returns. We'll see what happens there the rest of the night. A couple other districts here. A couple other districts to take you through in Georgia. If we can get it back up on the screen here. This is the one we just called. Vernon Jones versus Mike Collins. Now, Vernon Jones, a former Democrat, gained some prominence, won the endorsement of Donald Trump in this race. Collins, son of a former congressman, endorsed by Brian Kemp. So you had Trump versus the governor of Georgia again, Brian Kemp. Again, the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who survived with Trump's opposition in his primary. Recently, his candidate has won this runoff for a congressional seat here in Georgia overwhelmingly, although it should be pointed out certainly that while Vernon Jones was the Trump-endorsed candidate, Mike Collins said in this race, he said he doesn't believe the 2020 election was legitimately won by Joe Biden in Georgia. So he certainly ran on Trump-ish themes and is going to win this primary without Trump's endorsement.
Before we keep moving, I'm glad you brought this one up. I want to make sure we don't read too much into some of these races. And you did mention Vernon Jones kind of jumped over to the GOP side late, so I don't know if this makes this particular race less of a bellwether in terms of Trump's political clout in Georgia. Like, I just want to make sure we keep this one in particular in perspective.
Yeah, no, and there are some sort of extenuating circumstances here too. There was an allegation of rape that was made against Jones that became an issue in this campaign from 2004. So, again, if you say Trump endorsed Jones and this is a rebuke of Trump, I would keep in mind Collins ran on Trump issues right up to and including saying that Donald Trump was the rightful winner of Georgia in the 2020 election.
A few more primaries I should ask you about. Virginia and D.C. also have some races tonight, right?
Yeah, let's take a look at Virginia, where we've got returns coming in. And in fact, we have a winner in the Republican primary we can show you right here in the 2nd district. Here it is, Jen Kiggins. This is good news for national Republicans. They believe this district, the 2nd district, you see Virginia Beach, Norfolk, that area here, that they believe this is one of their prime pickup opportunities. Now, Kiggins will face off against, here's the Democrat, Elaine Luria. She was elected in that blue wave of 2018. Elaine Luria, a Navy veteran, survived in 2020, now will be running in what looks like a very hostile political climate. Kiggins, also a Navy veteran, was recruited by national Republicans, backed by national Republicans. Democrats actually tried to pour some money into sort of backing, if you will, her opponent in this race, believing him to be a weaker candidate. That strategy backfired. Kiggins gets the nomination. The 2nd district of Virginia will be very competitive this November. We have what a barn burner we got here in the 7th district. Again, the Democratic incumbent here is Abigail Spanberger, elected in that blue wave of 2018. This is very politically competitive territory. And at this hour, look at this. You've got 93 votes here separating Derek Anderson. He's an ex-Green Beret, or Yesley Vega. She's in the Prince William County Board of Supervisors. You have State Senator Bryce Reeves. He's running 3rd right now. There's a lot of different dynamics in this race, but the bottom line is whoever emerges in this race to run against Spanberger, that is going to be a race that'll tell us a lot about nationally who's going to control the House this November. We
got to have you back to talk about Virginia, because I feel like races like this kind of define where Northern Virginia is.
Yes.
Because the line keeps like where the blue kind of wave, the blue wall of Washington D.C., how deep that extends into Virginia feels like it's kind of moved over the years.
Well, in this district too, because of the redistricting process, this 7th district actually moved closer to Northern Virginia. So for Spanberger, who, again, this is very politically competitive territory. It voted for Glenn Youngkin, the Republican who won the gubernatorial race last year. This district did under these current lines. But that was good news for her that it did move a little bit closer to Washington, D.C., taking a few more of those Democratic-friendly suburbs. Again, that will be a tough race for her this November.
I know I have to let you go. I just want to note that at the moment, we've got some races that are still too early to call at the moment. The Alabama U.S. Senate runoff, the Alabama Secretary of State, and gubernatorial runoffs too early to call. And also in Texas, that race we were watching, progressives Jessica Cisneros conceded tonight to the Democratic incumbent Congressman Henry Cuellar. NBC's Steve Kornacki, appreciate you starting us off tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, it's really easy to ignore these state elections. As much as we love Steve, it's easy to ignore these races, especially if they're not where you live. But January 6th taught us that all these jobs matter. They help uphold the Constitution. And that state-by-state allegiance to the rule of law was today's focus of the January 6th hearings. Co-chair Liz Cheney set the scene.
Mr. Trump was told by his own advisors that he had no basis for his stolen election claims. Yet he continued to pressure state officials to change the election results.
And when they wouldn't embrace the big lie and substitute the will of the voters with Donald Trump's will to remain in power, Donald Trump worked to ensure they face the consequences.
And the system held because people of courage, Republicans and Democrats, like the witnesses you will hear today, put their oath to the country and Constitution above any other consideration.
One witness today was Georgia's incumbent Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. Committee member Adam Schiff asked the secretary about that now infamous phone call with the former president.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Mr. Secretary, was the president here asking you for exactly what he wanted? One more vote than his opponent.
What I knew is that we didn't have any votes to find.
Secretary Raffensperger and all of today's witnesses said they and their families faced intimidation and threats for resisting President Trump's demands.
I was getting text all over the country, and then eventually my wife started getting the text, and hers typically came in as sexualized texts, which were disgusting. Some people broke into my daughter-in-law's home, and my son has passed, and she's a widow and has 2 kids, and so we're very concerned about her safety also.
That may have been the most visceral part of today's hearings, the impact of this election hoax on ordinary people. Arizona State House Speaker Rusty Bowers testified that the threats got personal and physical.
We have various groups come by, and they have had video panel trucks with videos of me proclaiming me to be a pedophile and a pervert and a corrupt and politician. One gentleman that had the 3 bars on his chest, and he had a pistol and was threatening my neighbor, not with the pistol, but just vocally. When I saw the gun, I knew I had to get close.
It takes a lot of everyday people to make an election work. Shay Moss and her mother worked the 2020 election in the Atlanta area. She says the harassment started after the former president called them out in election hoaxes by name.
A lot of threats, wishing death upon me, telling me that, I'll be in jail with my mother, and saying things like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920. Yeah.
Were a lot of these threats and vile comments racist in nature?
A lot of them were racist. A lot of them were just hateful.
Ms. Moss's mother, Ruby Freeman, got the last word at the hearing. It's been a tough time for the woman affectionately known as Lady Ruby.
There is nowhere I feel safe. Nowhere. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one, but he targeted me, Lady Ruby, a small business owner, a mother, a proud American citizen who stand up to help Fulton County run an election in the middle of the pandemic.
Let's break down today's hearing with NBC News senior political analyst Jonathan Allen and NBC News contributor Jill Winebanks. She also served as a prosecutor during the Watergate scandal. Good to see you both. And John, I wonder if I could start with you. I mean, I think the testimony from Lady Ruby was the capstone of the day for a reason, that it was the committee's way to sort of drive home in a way that kind of transcended some of the politics, how this affected everyday people who were just kind of caught up in this hoax.
Absolutely. It's so tactile. So many of the things we're talking about are conceptual and abstract. The preservation of our republic, the principles of separation of powers. In this case, you've got Lady Ruby, if I can call her that, with this very emotional appeal about, she was targeted by the President of the United States for the grave sin, and I say that sarcastically, of choosing to work an election as a poll worker. Her daughter, the same way. These are people who are targeted, who become victims of hatred, as her daughter said, racist attacks, simply for participating in the process. And they are the real people who are affected, not just on that day, but for months and years ahead.
Jill Winebanks, the case that the committee has presented so far is obviously not a formal criminal case. This isn't a trial, although it definitely feels very prosecutorial. What is your sense of how what we heard today builds on what we've heard so far?
I think it's been a very effective building of a overall overarching conspiracy to take down our democracy, to undo the election results. And each day they have presented a very discrete set of evidence about a particular part of the plot. And today's plot, based on my unofficial polling on Twitter of people who commented for me, this one was really emotional for people. I think Shaye Moss was voted the most impactful, and it was because it really did show the threats in a new and different light. And I think overall, I was surprised at how much the threats were to all of these people, to the elected officials, but also to Ruby Freeman and to her daughter. Both of them suffered enormous consequences for having done nothing but the right thing in helping us run our elections. And no matter how much the facts were put before people and how many times Donald Trump was told, no, there was no suitcase, there was a USB, he said, there were vials of cocaine, turned out to be a ginger mint. It really was very powerful, and I think that may actually impact people in ways that can't be foreseen, that maybe some of the Republicans watching today will say, that could be me. These are all Republicans testifying, although we don't know Ruby and Shaye Moss's politics, and we shouldn't, because they're election workers, they're nonpartisan. But all of the other witnesses have been Republicans who have been threatened by Donald Trump, threatened by the people who work for him, their homes invaded. It's really been a shocking day, very powerful.
John Allen, one of the things we heard a lot about today were some of the lawmakers who were allegedly involved in kind of fomenting these hoaxes by moving documents or trying to create additional slates of electors. For those of you watching from other parts of the world, just to be clear, like the Electoral College is a real group of people. It's picked state by state. And there's an official list that goes to Washington. And part of the issue, John, was that Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin, supposedly was behind an effort to try to move a fake list of state electors, a non-official list. Tell us more about that.
Let me back up for just a minute, because what you've talked about there, the fake, is so important. It's so crazy. There were 7 states where the Trump campaign, according to the testimony we heard and the documents we saw today watching the hearing, 7 states where they put together and organized fake electors, an alternate slate, an alternate reality, an alternate truth of fake electors, because what they had failed to do through the courts, what they had failed to do in terms of trying to get the state election officials in power in these various states not to certify the election results. When they failed through the legal normal means, they went through this extra legal process of creating fake electors, and they met and they signed documents and they sent them to the National Archives. And of course, Jill's the lawyer on here, so I'll let her to speak to the legality of passing fake documents to the federal government. But this is really like an amazing plot that was unveiled today by the January 6th committee. And Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin, according to a text exchange between his chief of staff and a staffer for Mike Pence on January 6th, the day that the Capitol was attacked, as Donald Trump is trashing Mike Pence to an audience, riling them up at Mike Pence, this Ron Johnson chief of staff says that his boss wants to slip something to Pence. Is there a way to get that done? And the Pence staffer says, well, what is it? And Johnson's staffer says, well, look, we've got these 2 slates of electors from Michigan and Wisconsin. He wants to give them to Pence. And what's unspoken in that text exchange is that the point was that Pence would be able to essentially certify that slate of electors, or at least say that they were competing appropriately or effectively with the actual slate of electors. And the Pence staffer replied, don't give him those. Don't give those fake electors to Pence. Obviously, Pence, as we've seen before, took a pretty strong stand at the end of the day. And ultimately, the staff around him were in the same position, that they were not going to let Donald Trump upend the will of the voters on January 6th. But Johnson, obviously his staff involved, his staff were saying that he personally wanted to meet with the vice president to give him those fake electors.
And Joe, real briefly, I wanted to play one clip from the Arizona State House Speaker Rusty Bowers, who was asked by Congressman Adam Schiff of California about a sitting congressman who was involved, Andy Biggs of Arizona, who was involved in an effort to try to decertify these electors. Listen.
Did you also receive a call from U.S. Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona on the morning of January 6th?
I did.
And what did Mr. Biggs ask you to do?
I believe that was the day that the vote was occurring to each state to have certification, or to declare the certification of the electors. And he asked if I would sign on both to a letter that had been sent from my state and or that I would support the decertification of the electors. And I said I would not.
So, Jill, from here, we've had a number of state officials say that their oath to the Constitution and to just obey the law was greater than what former President Trump was asking them to do. When the next hearing happens on Thursday and in the hearings after this, what do you think the committee needs to bring next to build on what we've learned so far? Briefly, before we go.
They're going to be looking at the Department of Justice and how the administration tried to use them to do what they couldn't do legally. They were trying to get a new attorney general because the acting attorney general wouldn't send a letter saying there's fraud in the election and so you should relook at things. Those are going to be a whole new category of crimes. And to answer, John's question, yes, of course, it's a crime to submit a false document to the government. So many crimes have been committed, and some have come out that we didn't even know about. The things like the big ripoff we didn't know about until now. So the hearings have been effective in showing a pattern and practice of developing an overarching conspiracy to undermine the election. And then they've shown some new and different crimes that we didn't know about. Things like when Rudy Giuliani testified in Georgia before a Senate hearing. I'm suspecting he did that under oath, because you would always take an oath at a congressional hearing. Well, that's perjury because he committed lies at that time. So there have been so many crimes that are blatantly in our face right now and that deserve to be taken seriously, and accountability needs to happen. Otherwise, if there is another election and Donald Trump is reelected, we will lose our democracy. So accountability is essential, and that means indictments.
NBC's Jonathan Allen and Jill Winebanks, appreciate you both making time for us tonight. Thank you very much. And remember, the next hearing is on Thursday. Please stick with us for live coverage of the hearing. And of course, we'll have analysis Thursday night here on NBC News Now. But still to come in this hour, the Uvalde investigation. We are learning some heartbreaking new details about the shooting. It took hours to end the standoff. Could it have been done in minutes?
The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children.
Breaking news from Washington tonight in the effort to set more gun violence legislation on the table in the Senate. A bipartisan group of senators says they have reached a deal on gun legislation. That group includes Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Republican John Cornyn of Texas, Democrat Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, Tom Tillis of North Carolina. The negotiators released the text of the measure. It's called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Came out just about an hour before we came on the air tonight. Now, according to a statement, the bill, quote, will not infringe on any law-abiding Americans' Second Amendment rights, unquote. The bill includes state funding to implement so-called red flag laws. It also includes enhanced background checks for people 18 to 21. It addresses the so-called boyfriend loophole with that nexus between domestic violence and gun violence. And it also closes a number of legal loopholes that have to do with buying guns in criminal proceedings. For example, it was a crime to import guns into the U.S. This would make it a crime to export them from the U.S., to buy them for drug deals or criminal cartels, things like that. The first vote on this is a simple majority motion to proceed. We're expecting that to happen tonight. If and when that vote moves forward, we'll let you know. We also have a little breaking news out of Uvalde, Texas. The city council has voted not to grant Pete Arredondo a leave of absence from future council meetings. He was the school police chief at the time of the shooting, and he's been criticized for waiting too long before officers entered the classroom to kill the gunman. You may remember he just joined the city council recently. He has not been granted a leave of absence from that position. We also got some responses in a hearing today in Texas to the way that law enforcement dealt with that shooting. One law enforcement officer, a high-ranking one, called the police response, quote, an abject failure. That was Colonel Steve McCraw. He leads the Department of Public Safety in Texas. And he gave the Texas State Senate a minute-by-minute account of that day. Colonel McCraw referenced some newly released surveillance video. He said that it shows 11 police officers inside the school 3 minutes after the gunman entered the campus. Law enforcement officials said officers did not rush the classroom because they were waiting for a key to unlock the door. It turns out that the door was not locked. Officers could have just rushed in.
We do know this. There's compelling evidence that the law enforcement response to the attack at Robb Elementary was an abject failure and antithetical to everything we've learned over the last 2 decades since the Columbine massacre. The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children.
Also, the Austin American-Statesman and the Texas Tribune have new reporting on the police response. It seems that officers with rifles and at least one ballistic shield were on scene about 20 minutes after the attack began. Now, NBC News has not seen or reviewed the documents behind this reporting, but it's all part of the push for answers. What might have saved those 19 lives at Robb Elementary School? What went wrong? And who will be held responsible? Joining us now is Seth Chan, the editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. Mr. Chan, welcome. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Joshua.
So how does what we learned today sharpen our understanding of what happened at Robb Elementary?
Well, the state is now taking a very decisive position in blaming Uvalde Schools Police Chief Pete Arredondo for an abject failure of leadership and command, saying he waited far too long, did not follow protocols in storming the room. Now, of course, Chief Arredondo has previously told us, that he did try the locks on the 2 doors, and that finding them locked, he needed to wait for a set of master keys. The state is saying that account is not true, and this great discrepancy, it really kind of compounds the shock and anger that I think a lot of people feel about what happened here.
Tell us more about the documents that you and the Texas Tribune reviewed. What did we learn? What was the biggest thing, perhaps, that we learned about the timeline of that day that you didn't know before?
We knew a lot of cops had assembled very, very quickly, really within minutes of the gunman arriving. What we did not know, I think, until now was the extent to which there was so much equipment being amassed in the hallway. Guns, shields, even a so-called Halligan, a firefighting tool that's used to break down doors, to force through doors, and other equipment. And you ended up having, by the end of the hour plus ordeal, 60 to 80 law enforcement officers from up to 14 different agencies, but the command was, led by the school's police chief. Now, Arredondo did tell us previously that he did not consider himself the incident commander. What's clear from the videos, however, is that most of the cops in there did consider him the commander. And having not gotten the order to breach or to charge in, they didn't.
Explain that a little bit more in terms of who the incident commander would be. How do we know in a situation like that who's supposed to be in charge?
Joshua, you nailed the question, and we've been asking that. And there isn't, one single handbook that says that. There's been an evolving body of increasingly detailed kind of police best practices. coming off of the so-called Columbine doctrine, right? 20 years of mass shootings, 20 years, tragically, of school shootings, where the authorities have debated what is the best response. Now, the current sense of best practice is if there is a shooter situation going on, you must breach, you must confront. You cannot, minutes matter, seconds matter. You must try to stop the loss of life. Arredondo's perspective, when he spoke with us, and he has not recently, his perspective was that he thought it was kind of a barricaded, kind of hostage type situation where the damage had already been done and there wasn't going to be additional lives lost. Now, that's going to be a crucial question because we know at least one teacher died in the ambulance. We know it's possible that during the 77 minutes, it's possible that other lives could have been saved had the police acted with greater alacrity. It is also possible, I want to note, that with an AR-15, that a lot of the people who died, there were 21 in total, may very well have died instantly. A pediatrician told Congress, for example, about children's bodies being pulverized, in his words. I'm sorry to use such vivid language. So it remains a very complex issue, and I hope that that's coming across.
So in terms of what happens from here, and forgive me, I think in the beginning I said 19 lives. I should have said 19 young lives. There were 21 people who died there, 19 of whom were children. But in terms of what happens from here, where does this go? I mean, it seems like there's a growing consensus of information that Uvalde screwed this up. The governor, Greg Abbott, released a statement this evening, just before we went on the air, kind of repeating his goal to make public as much as possible. I know there have been a lot of people who've been trying to get information from the city and the police departments in the states, and they claim that they've had difficulty kind of getting all the information in a fulsome manner. What's the next step from here? Are we expecting heads to roll? Are we expecting charges to be filed? Like, where does this go?
Well, Joshua, what we've heard is that it's unlikely that police would face criminal charges. There isn't really kind of a civil liability for incompetent policing. There's certainly, if police are grossly abusing or neglecting their authority, obviously, unauthorized use of force against civilians, that kind of thing, that's one thing. But unfortunately, if you're trying your best, but you simply are not making wise decisions in the heat of the moment, it seems harder that civil liability will come out of that. Now, what I think could be interesting here is that Texas may be reviewing the creation of all these tiny kind of state school district police departments that have kind of proliferated around the state. So Uvalde's schools police was only created 4 years ago. It only has 6 officers. So, I think some people might legitimately ask, could this not only small-town police chief, but small-town school district police chief be realistically expected to command, a force 10 times more than what he's used to, and in kind of a military or, kind of warlike situation, not what you typically expect with being a school cop. So I think that that's some of it. And of course, Joshua, I want to emphasize that there's a bigger national picture here, right? There has been so much attention on failures in police command, perhaps training, but what's clear is that the police there was no shortage of tools and weaponry here. There was no shortage of police officers, and there was certainly no shortage of motivation. So I think there's a lot of focus legitimately right now on command failures. But I also think a larger question has to ultimately get into gun policy and school safety and mental health, which of course are the 3 big issues that I think Congress and, lawmakers everywhere are talking about right now.
And those are indeed part of the legislation that was released tonight. The bipartisan package does include a lot of money for mental health and also for crisis intervention, a significant investment in that if, of course, it becomes law. Sewell Chan, the editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. Appreciate you making time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including a weather update on those brutal triple-digit temperatures today. COVID vaccines finally going into the arms of the nation's youngest children, whether they like needles or not. And a verdict tonight in a Bill Cosby sexual assault trial dating back to the 70s. Tonight's headlines begin with weather. It is the first day of summer and another day of dangerous heat in much of the U.S. Yesterday in Houston, a 5-year-old child died after being left in a car for hours. The temperature was more than 100 degrees. NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns has more on this heat wave. Hey, Bill.
Oh, good evening to you, Joshua, and I feel like I'm just on a rinse and repeat cycle with you. We keep doing the same thing over and over again. The heat wave, it just keeps shifting around the country, and now we're going to watch it increasing, and we're going to come close to setting some pretty impressive records in the next couple of days. So the map's kind of a little disjointed right now because the heat advisories are kind of widespread, but they're also a little like jigsaw puzzle pieces. New Orleans, you're underneath a heat advisory. Tulsa, Memphis, the Kansas City area, Milwaukee, also up to areas of Michigan. And then a little section of California from Sacramento down through the valley, San Jose included in that too. In all, about 51 million people. So that's roughly about 1 in 6 Americans right now under heat advisory. The temperatures this afternoon were really, really hot, especially in Chicago. It felt like 100 to 105. Same for Memphis. Areas in the south still feels very hot and very humid, and it's going to get hotter in the days ahead. And the dangerous conditions arrive as we go through Wednesday afternoon. A lot of areas like Atlanta, it's very unusual to get 2 100-degree days in a row. But we have a chance of doing that. It hasn't happened in about 10 years in Atlanta. Tomorrow's supposed to be 100 degrees. Tallahassee is going to jump up to 102. So you really see where the peak of the heat is setting up. The Florida Panhandle, southern Alabama, into areas of Georgia, a little bit of the upstate of South Carolina. Nashville heat index should be 103. Notice it's not as humid on the eastern seaboard. It's been unusually, I don't want to call it dry air, but it's not like the deserts, but compared to how it typically is in the summer, it actually feels a little more comfortable. So that's why the heat index is not that bad. Thursday is the peak of this heat wave. And if there's going to be one headline to watch, and we've been talking about this all week, it's Tallahassee, Florida. That's not a misprint. They're predicting 105 degrees. That's like a temperature you associate with like Tucson or like Phoenix. 105 in Tallahassee. That would tie the hottest temperature ever recorded in the city's history. So if we get up to 106, that would break the all-time record. And by the way, the Florida all-time record is 109. We have to watch out. A few locations here just to the west of Tallahassee have at least a slight chance of that. And then, as we mentioned, not much relief heading towards the weekend. Yes, it's not going to be 100 anymore. It'll drop down into the mid-90s. Atlanta, same for you. Memphis, look at you. Saturday, Sunday, back into the hundreds. Texas is going to bake this upcoming weekend. Dallas could be about 104. And towards the end of June, it stays hot right through the deep south. We do get a little cooling in the northern plains. We'll take that. And where the drought's horrendous, the mega drought, last 20 years, and this is the driest year ever recorded, it's going to stay dry and above average in areas of the west. The only areas that have a chance for a little bit of wet weather will be New Mexico and Arizona and heading into areas of the Rockies. So as far as severe weather goes, also, if you have any plans tomorrow, especially in the afternoon, D.C. to Baltimore, Fredericksburg, Pittsburgh, Central PA, not so worried about tornadoes, but we could get some large hail, and we definitely could get some damaging winds out of this, too. So anyone traveling through PA, interior sections of the Mid-Atlantic, keep an eye out on that, Joshua. So all eyes on Tallahassee, though, 105 on Thursday.
Thank you, Bill. That's NBC's Bill Cairns with the latest. Please be careful if you're outside. Please drink more water than you think you need. The U.S. reached a milestone in its fight against COVID today. Kids 6 months to 5 years old are starting to get their first doses of vaccines. President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden visited a vaccination clinic in D.C. Mr. Biden called it a day of relief and celebration.
This is a very historic milestone, a monumental step forward. The United States is now the first country in the world to offer safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines for children as young as 6 months old. And the first time in our fight against this pandemic, nearly every American can now have access to life-saving vaccines.
And President Biden is not the only person expressing relief. Many parents said they share that sentiment.
A lot of her extended family have never met her because we haven't been willing to travel or haven't felt safe enough to travel. And like you said, it felt like a lot of people moved on and left us, parents with young children behind.
We're just really excited and relieved, and looking forward to really starting this guy's life.
The White House says parents can now begin scheduling vaccine appointments at children's hospitals, pharmacies, or their pediatrician's office. Today, a jury ruled against Bill Cosby in a civil trial, supporting one woman's claim that he sexually assaulted her at the Playboy Mansion back in 1975. At the time, she was just 16 years old. Judy Huth is now 64. She testified that Mr. Cosby kept pursuing her even after she disclosed her age. She also said she told him that she had her period, even though she did not, in hopes that that would get him to stop. Meanwhile, in the closing arguments, Mr. Cosby's defense team asked the jurors to only focus on the evidence presented to them in this case and forget any other accusations against him, including any labels like, quote, sexual predator. Ms. Huth was awarded $500,000 in damages. A spokesman for Bill Cosby called the accusations fabricated and said his client will appeal. Up next, an update on the war in Ukraine with surprise visits from a U.S. official and an A-list celebrity. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. We now know of at least 2 Americans killed in Ukraine during its war with Russia. A newspaper obit says Stephen Zabielski was killed on May 15th. The paper claims that he died fighting for Ukraine in a village along the Black Sea. Mr. Zabielski was 52. The State Department has confirmed his death, but it has not confirmed exactly how he died. Meanwhile, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland made a surprise visit to Ukraine. He reiterated America's promise to help prosecute war crimes.
I'm here to express the unwavering support of the United States for the people of Ukraine in the midst of the unprovoked and unjust Russian invasion. I'm here to continue our discussions between myself and the Prosecutor General about the actions that the United States is taking to assist the Ukrainian authorities in holding accountable those responsible for the atrocities, for the war crimes that the entire world has seen. The United States is sending an unmistakable message. There is no place to hide. We and our partners will pursue every avenue available to make sure that those who are responsible for these atrocities are held accountable.
Joining us now is Angela Stent, a senior advisor to Georgetown University's Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies. She's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Professor Stent, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good to be back.
So what the Attorney General said tonight, how much leverage does he actually have to do that? I mean, it's not like the world can compel this to be investigated by the International Criminal Court, or we can drag Russian soldiers into U.S. courts. It seems like his authority to actually do anything with regard to war crimes might be rather limited.
Well, he and the person who's going to go out there, was the top Nazi hunter from the United States, they can certainly try and identify the culprits, the people who are responsible for some of the atrocities we've seen. They can help gather evidence. They have probably more experience than the Ukrainians have in how you deal with war crimes. It's a very deliberate process. You have to have the evidence. So I think there's quite a lot the U.S. can do to help the Ukrainians. Now, whether any of the perpetrators can ever be brought to justice is, of course, another question. But certainly the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice will try, and they themselves, I think, are looking into this. They will try and bring some of these people to justice.
What about the death of this American in Ukraine, this Mr. Stephen Zabielski? I wonder what you make of these Americans on the ground. And we should be clear, the U.S. does not have any formal boots on the ground in Ukraine. That would be a matter that would involve NATO, and it would dramatically complicate this war. And that President Biden has said flat out he is not willing to do. But the idea that Americans, a very small handful, have gone on their own to supposedly fight on the ground there, what do you make of that?
Well, there is an international brigade, so to speak, of foreign fighters who can volunteer to fight with the Ukrainian army. And there are some Americans, we know that. We know that at least 2 of them have been captured, too. President Biden has been clear about 2 things. First of all, there will be no formal American boots on the ground. No U.S. people from the U.S. military are going to be fighting there. And also really discouraged Americans from going and fighting there. But we have Army veterans who've been involved in other conflicts, who have the skills, and who really want to help the Ukrainians. So the U.S. can't stop them from going. But it's obviously very ill-advised because this is a very brutal war, and we don't see any end to it in sight.
Let me ask you about Russia, a kind of peripheral story related to Russia. We heard today from Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov about Brittany Griner, that's the WNBA star who was detained back in February at Moscow's airport carrying a vape pen. Here is what Mr. Peskov told our senior international correspondent, Keir Simmons, about whether or not Ms. Griner is considered a hostage there. Watch.
The US government is now approaching this as a hostage situation.
I would strongly disagree with that. We cannot call her hostage. Why should we call her hostage?
What about?
She violated Russian law. And now she's being prosecuted. It's not about being a hostage.
Professor Stant, what do you make of this whole situation and the way that the Russian government has tried to message on this?
Well, of course they're going to say she's not a hostage. And don't forget, we have Paul Whelan, the ex-Marine, who's been in jail for a number of years in Russia, who I would call also a hostage, who was arrested on trumped-up evidence that was planted on him. So, in fact, I would say that Brittany Griner is a hostage because they're holding her. They have some leverage. I think, the way she's being treated is probably she is a victim of this war that has broken out. They keep delaying the time when they're going to bring her to trial. That's not unusual for Russia. And of course, embassy officials have been in contact with her. Apparently she's being held in conditions that are better, say, than what Mr. Whelan is being held in. But there's a limit that to what they can do. And you must know, we have a very minimal diplomatic presence in Russia because we've thrown out Russians who were not really diplomats, and they threw out our diplomats. There are very few people there who can, in fact, assist in that. And I think it's much more difficult now to get access to her and for our officials to try and move this forward because of this war.
Yeah, we did just get you answered the next question I was going to ask. A viewer named JC emailed asking whether the U.S. has an embassy in Russia or what American legal authority in Russia might protect Brittany Griner's rights. But it sounds like there's very little, and that is kind of the root of the problem. One more thing I would ask you about before we go. Yesterday, actor Ben Stiller highlighted World Refugee Day while he was visiting Poland and Ukraine. He met with President Zelensky in Kyiv. Where do you see the refugee situation going from here before we go?
Right. Well, the refugee situation is dire. I mean, there have been apparently 13 million, so 5 million Ukrainians have left Ukraine for other countries, refugees. And then there are another 8 million internally displaced people who've had to leave their homes and go and try and live somewhere safer in Ukraine. Now, some refugees have already returned to Ukraine. It's hard being a refugee. They want to go home, but most of them are still outside Ukraine. So this is really a dire situation. And the ones that are refugees, they've been very well treated by the Poles, by other European countries. Some of them are coming to the United States too. But, they need resources and they need to be relocated. So I think it was great to see those two actors and comedians together, Ben Stiller and President Zelensky. And I think what Mr. Stiller is doing is very important also to bring to the world knowledge of the plight of Ukrainian refugees.
Angela Stent of Georgetown Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies, and also of the Brookings Institution. Professor, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Rush hour is a lot slower in the UK right now, with a major strike on its railways. What's happening and what workers are demanding before we go. If you are up late watching this show in the UK, I hope it's not the stress of riding the tube that's keeping you awake. Because today, rail workers walked off the job, beginning 3 days of demonstrations. Another strike on the London Underground has stranded millions of people. From our partners at Sky News, Paul Kelso has the story.
The only arrivals at Manchester Victoria this morning came under their own steam. There were no trains to disturb the peace. The station shut down almost completely on day one of the first national rail strike in 30 years.
It's just after 8 at Manchester Victoria. It's peak rush hour. Well, not this morning. The only service running at all is the tram serving the city. Usually this would be full of passengers coming in and out of Leeds and Liverpool. But today, there's nothing.
It was a similar picture across the country, with London Underground shut down, fewer than 20% of overground services running anywhere, and large chunks of the country cut off, to the inconvenience of many.
There is no way I will work from home. I have to get to work. But now that everything has been disrupted,
At the end of the day, the end goal is to get better pay and better conditions. And if this is what we have to do, and I support the workers, then that's what has to be done.
We're going to Cambridge tomorrow to see a building. We were going to go by train, but we're going to drive now. Working people have the right to stand up for themselves, and if they don't feel that they're being offered the right deal, then I think anybody's got the right to strike.
As up to 50,000 RMT members walked out in a dispute over pay and conditions, the blame game resumed. The Prime Minister suggesting commuters should expect a long haul.
We need the union barons to sit down with Network Rail and the train companies and get on with it. And we need, I'm afraid, everybody, and I say this to the country as a whole, we need to get ready to stay the course.
Grant Shapps can come to the table if he wants. I'm not particularly bothered. But if he wants to come to the table, he'd be welcome, as long as he comes in a framework of goodwill. What he needs to do, really, is allow the management of the train operating companies and Network Rail the licence to get on with negotiating.
But while there was disruption, fears this solstice strike would be the longest day for travellers too were unfounded. Transport for Greater Manchester say road traffic was up just 2%, despite 80% of trains being cancelled. Primed by the pandemic, this was the day millions stayed at home. At this environmental consultant's, COVID accelerated a culture of flexible working. So when the strike was announced, they knew what to do.
It hasn't really affected me today. I'm working from home. I've chosen to work from home today. So it's pretty easy for me to just log on as I did through the pandemic working from home.
This change in working habits may have made some jobs strike-proof, but a permanent cut to commuter numbers is one reason rail bosses are seeking reform.
Our commuter base is the bit where we are struggling to see people return, so they're choosing to work from home, do virtual meetings, etc. And I guess at the moment we're seeing different levels across the country, so here we can see typically up to about 40%, 50% sometimes in our commuter travel.
Talks between Network Rail and the RMT will resume on Wednesday, but services will remain disrupted ahead of further strikes that will come at a price for city centre businesses and test public patience and the appetite for compromise. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Manchester.
Hey, thank you for making time for us. Remember, you can send me your questions about anything we've talked about tonight or anything you think we should be discussing. We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. And remember, we are still watching those primaries in a number of states, Alabama, Georgia, Virginia, and elsewhere. We still have some races that are too early to call, including the Republican Secretary of State runoff and the Democratic gubernatorial runoff. Keep an eye on those races on the NBC News app and at nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.